For the first time ever, Alabama will have two black members of the U.S. House at the same time. Representative-elect Shomari Figures is here to discuss his election, the litigation that made it possible, and his priorities in the next Congress. Welcome back to Defending Democracy. I'm Marc Elias. Let's get started. Welcome, Representative-elect Figures, to Defending Democracy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Marc.
All right, so we're going to talk a lot about your election and the congressional district you represent, but I can't help but begin by noting that you and I, although I don't know that we've ever met, have almost certainly crossed paths. You worked in the Obama administration as a liaison to the Attorney General. You were legislative counsel to Senator Sherrod Brown, a longtime client of mine, and I'm really saddened that he came up short in this election. And you worked for as Deputy Chief of Staff to the current Attorney General, Merrick Garland. And I'm just curious, before we get to the Alabama congressional race, which is really why I wanted to talk to you about, kind of what is your take on what's happening in Washington, D.C.? You know, you've not yet been sworn in as a member, but you've worked in the executive branch, in the White House, in the legislative branch. Kind of like, what's your take on what's happening and message to people who are watching all of this with some trepidation?
Yeah, look, I think what we've seen over the past probably decade plus is we've seen a significant, albeit gradual, and I think it started getting downhill fast here in the last 5 to 7 years, a shift away from people's focus being the sort of statesmanship or stateswomanship that Congress and the Senate have historically been grounded in. People going there to represent their state first and foremost. And I think with the decline, with the eroding of that, we saw people gravitating towards pushing and exploiting national issues and deepening divides around some issues that there are legitimate differences on. And I think with that we saw a lack of people being motivated to do what was right on behalf of the people that they represent, and instead they became more fearful of retribution coming from national political stakeholders, and it kind of led us to where we are now, where we've seen a significant departure from the norms of Congress, a significant departure from the norms of the normal standards of decency and integrity and respect and humility in too many of our government leaders, and that is unfortunately becoming the sort of standard bearer for too many people in certain positions in Washington. And so I remain optimistic. I had the opportunity to work for Mr. Hope and Change himself, President Obama. And so I remain optimistic that we will see a return to the days where people were willing to work across the party lines to get things done for back home.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, I ran through very, very quickly, and maybe I should have gone more slowly. You worked for President Obama, who was, though he commanded a overwhelming majority in his electoral victories, particularly his 2008 victory, and commanding victories with his coattails in the House and the Senate, he was actually someone who did work to try to lower the temperature and work across party lines. His famous speech in 2004 at the Democratic Convention, which I actually saw in person, and it was as amazing in person as you see it in video, was about how we need to bridge between red and blue America. You worked for a senator from Ohio who was, someone who knew how to work in tandem with the concerns of both Democratic and Republican constituents. You worked for an attorney general most recently who, is whatever else people say good and bad about Merrick Garland, he is a scrupulously honest and kind of non-partisan figure, someone in the true tradition of what the attorney generalship should be. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that's what we're going to see. And I'm just, I'm curious, how, as someone who's now coming into a body that has a lot of partisan acrimony, and particularly among Republicans, a lot of you know, and I'll say this, you don't have to agree with it. I would say unserious people who want to cause partisan strife for their own political gain as much as, and theater as much as they do for anything else. I'm just wondering how you translate that experience and your recent election into a governing philosophy, given what the House seems to have become.
Yeah, for this role, I mean, one of the most, I guess, influential and most relevant positions, perhaps the most important position that I held in terms of preparing me for what I'm walking into was working for Senator Brown. Not only was he a person who at his core was there to do what was right on behalf of people in his state, he represented a state. He was one of, I think when I was there, it was one of seven. I think now it's down to four
That's right.
states that have both a Republican senator and a Democratic senator. And so working in a bipartisan fashion in that office was not optional. It's what you had to do. If you wanted to do something on behalf of the people of the state of Ohio, you had to work with then Senator Rob Portman and his team to try to make that happen. And so, you know, we were trained through that lens of making sure that you start with trying to secure universal support, at least in the state delegation, which for us meant in a bipartisan fashion. And so that's kind of the lens that I see it through. And perhaps that's naive, you know, in terms of what we've seen recently. But I just got back from Washington this morning, actually, from being up there for the better part of the last 2 weeks for freshman orientation. And I can tell you that the freshman members that I met from the Republican side, they at least verbally seem to want to be in a place too where we can tone this down. But I think they're also realistic in terms of the public pressure that they're going to face to fall in line with an administration. And so it is my hope that we can begin this route to sort of restoring statesmanship in Washington by finding those issues that don't discriminate based on, you know, partisan affiliation or even socioeconomic status. Like, for instance, like rural healthcare here in the state of Alabama, we have a healthcare crisis that's a little bit different than when people generally talk about healthcare. It's not just health insurance here in the state of Alabama. It's literally we've had hospitals closing at an alarming rate across this state and across this district. Half the counties have had a hospital close or have closed hospitals in this district now. And I was talking with a freshman member from right across the state line in Georgia, and it's something that they care about too. And so we're going to figure out ways that we can try to pick apart at issues like that. And I'm optimistic that we can find some of those issues, but I think we just have to be serious about what we're legislating and not legislate fringe issues that only seek to galvanize one way or the other people and sort of drive their feet in the ground.
I'll be right back with more of my conversation with Representative-elect Shomari Figures in a minute, but please take a second to click on the link above and become a subscriber to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletter. And if you want to show even more support for the Democracy Docket team, click in the link in the show notes below to become a paying member. You'll receive premium content and you'll make sure that they have the resources to do their important work. All right, so the big reason I wanted to have you on, even before you took office, is because you represent the Alabama's 2nd Congressional District. And this is a historic moment for Alabama and frankly for the country, because the voters of Alabama have been subjected to illegal redistricting lines for some number of years now. There was a lawsuit brought. My law firm was involved actually in bringing the lawsuit that said that when the state of Alabama redistricted, it failed to comply with the Voting Rights Act. And the result of that lawsuit was victory and the requirement that Alabama create a new map that has 2 rather than 1 districts where black voters have the opportunity to elect their candidate of choice. And you now represent that new district. And I always say this, that, you know, federal law exists to protect voters. And the voters of Alabama were not protected by their state legislature. And it is the role of the federal courts to step in when that happens, and they did here. And this is illustrative of where the courts have worked, where for all of the cynicism about the federal judiciary and the Supreme Court. This is an instance in which the voters were protected, and you are now in a position to, a historic position to represent those voters. So tell us a little bit about, for people who, and a lot of the people in our audience followed the litigation, but tell us about the voters. Like, tell us what the district is. Like, what, we now know there are two voting, opportunity districts in the state of Alabama, but tell us a little bit about the contours of the district.
Yeah. So, look, as you mentioned, following the 2020 census, Alabama redistricted in 2021. And although a little less than a third of the state is African American, I think about 28% is African American. Only 1 out of 7 of our congressional districts had a legitimate opportunity to elect the candidate of choice of African American voters, and that is current Congresswoman Terry Sewell's district. And that has been that way since a lawsuit that was brought in the early 1990s when Congressman Earl Hilliard originally won that seat. And so, look, the lawsuit was brought, and they made the preliminary finding. The 3-judge panel, 2 of the judges whom were appointed by Donald Trump, made the preliminary finding that there was a likely Voting Rights Act violation. And the preliminary remedy that they ordered was to redraw the maps, and they gave the state the opportunity to redraw the maps, and they did not comply with the orders of the court in terms of the criteria. And so now they hired a special master to redraw the lines, and they did so in a way that now created a district that's 48% black, 46% white voting age population. So it's about as fairly balanced of a district as you're going to find. I don't know that there's a more racially balanced district in this country than District 2. Geographically, this district now goes from Mobile up to Montgomery, and then kind of all of the counties between Mississippi and Georgia, for the most part, with the exception of those that border the panhandle of Florida. And so it's a large district, but it includes a lot of history. It includes Montgomery, which is the birthplace of the civil rights movement. And it's so ironic that Montgomery is at the center of this district, because without a Montgomery, there's no civil rights movement. There is no Voting Rights Act. There is no litigation to create the district that we're running in right now. It also includes Tuskegee. It includes Troy, birthplace of John Lewis, and my hometown of Mobile. And so, geographically speaking, this district is predominantly rural. There are 13 counties that comprise this district. 11 of them are completely rural counties. 2 of them are Mobile and Montgomery. The other 2 are Mobile and Montgomery. And about 70% of the people in this district roughly live just in those 2 counties. But a lot of the need in this district, goes across those other 11 counties. I mean, this is, 7 of the 15 poorest counties in the state of Alabama are located in this district, which means that 7 of the poorest counties in America are located in this district. These are rural counties that have struggled with population loss, that have struggled with maintaining and recruiting industry, that have, that they have serious concerns that they will become ghost towns in the near future if we cannot do things like keep the hospitals open across these counties and give them a fighting chance of being able to recruit businesses and have families want to live there and retirees want to settle down there. So we got a lot of issues in this district as it is currently drawn. And the state of Alabama has refused to stop fighting the case. And so the case is now set for trial in 2025. And that's one of the big misconceptions about this district and this case and how we got here, is that it's not done. It's not over with. The district that we ran in and won on was the product of a preliminary injunction. So it's still a temporary remedy while the court hears the remainder of the evidence and comes back. Fortunately, the preliminary finding went up to the Supreme Court. The state of Alabama appealed it up to the Supreme Court, and in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court agreed with the lower court. That 3-judge panel that unanimously found, and with 2 of them being judges appointed by Donald Trump, I think it was a pretty resounding finding that there was a likely violation of the Voting Rights Act, and that the state had used race as a motivating factor in drawing the district lines.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm very familiar with the case. My law firm brought one of the two. There were two cases that wound up being consolidated. Brought one of the two, and you're right. The case is going to trial. It's worth noting, as you point out, that two of the three judges were appointed by Donald Trump. The third judge, by the way, was originally appointed by a Republican president as well.
Reagan.
So and as you also point out, the U.S. Supreme Court affirmed the decision of the trial court so far. I could go on endlessly asking you about the litigation, and if we have time, I may double back to it. But you mentioned that that healthcare and poverty are big issues in the district. Give us a sense of the campaign. One of the things that I think people who have never been involved in campaigns have a relatively negative view of them, and I understand why. They see a lot of television commercials. But one of the good things about campaigns is candidates like yourself get out to meet voters. You get to knock on doors. You get to go to events, and you hear the concerns of the constituents. So tell us a little bit about what the campaign was about, what people's concerns are. What were the issues that you think were motivating people to turn out and vote for you in the record numbers they did.
Yeah, look, we kept this campaign. We made a commitment from the moment we got into it that we were going to keep this campaign about local issues, because that's what congressional races should be about. I had one advisor or informal advisor very early on tell me that, hey, if you go to a city and their biggest issue is potholes, then you're going to Congress to fix potholes. And so, and there's truth in that, because people generally, regardless of where you're from, most people, the vast majority of people have no, deep understanding of what the role of government is at the various levels, the local municipalities and counties and state and, regional authorities and federal and Congress and Senate. They see you as someone who is asking them for a vote, and they have a problem. Therefore, you should be able to fix it. And that's I think a legitimate and fair expectation that people have of people running for government. And so we kept this running for government positions. And so we kept this campaign local, on the local issues. And we saw my opponent on the other side. They ran on national issues. They ran primarily very heavily on immigration, very heavily on the trans issue going down the home stretch. But we kept it on the local issues. Obviously, the economy is always a local issue. There is no greater local issue than money in my pocket. And so, we focused on that, focused on the things that we were going to try to do to revitalize communities. The healthcare piece was a significant piece. I'd go so far as to say it was more significant than I thought it was when we got in the race. And that's because as the campaign went on, it was becoming exacerbated in ways that communities were seeing directly. And what I mean by that is, so we're already in the state of Alabama. State of Alabama is one of just a handful of states that has still refused to expand Medicaid. And so in one of the poorest states in the nation, that would go a long way. That would go as far as 325,000 more people in the state of Alabama having access to health insurance. But what we saw from the time we got in this race last November until September, right before the election, in those, 13 counties in this district, 2 of them are Mobile and Montgomery. Set them to the side. They're a little bit different. They got multiple hospitals, a lot of people, a lot of doctors, and a lot of access. Those remaining 11 counties, 2 of them have not had a hospital in decades. So that leaves you 9. In those remaining 9 counties, we had 4 hospitals closed in that 10-month stretch from when I got in this race in November until September of 2024, a few months ago. And so, just in this district, like that's not 4 hospitals across the state, that's 4 in those remaining 9 counties, literally saw hospitals shut down or have to significantly curtail what the services that they can provide in order to remain open. And they basically just become an urgent care. And so, people were seeing that issue every single day in communities. It was like every other week we were losing another hospital. And so that became a real big deal. People began to care more about what is Medicaid expansion? What does it look like? Because we know that Medicaid expansion certainly would not have been a permanent solution to those hospitals staying open. But we know that none of those hospitals would have shut down if Medicaid had been already expanded in the state of Alabama. And so we were able to talk about that, and we were able to keep hearing about that from people who knew people that unfortunately went their whole lives having a job but not being able to afford health insurance, but making too much to qualify for Medicare, and they just don't go to a doctor. And so that was a big one. Gun violence was also a big issue that we would consistently hear about on the campaign. One that has touched far too many communities in far too many different negative ways, and one that people genuinely care a lot about providing resources to fix. And so we were able to, talk with our talk with leaders across the state about that issue, and that resonated quite a bit going down the stretch as well.
Yeah, you mentioned the fact that Alabama refuses to accept the additional Medicaid funding to expand Medicaid, and that it is one of a handful of states. And if you think about it, if you take a step back, I mean, you're probably at this point so used to that, like just hearing that from the outside, that is like an extraordinary thing. I mean, here it is,
Yeah.
a state that is clearly has population in need, and yet its state legislature and governor refuse to accept those funds.
And it's beyond just the poverty aspect of it. The reality of it is that the state of Alabama, for all intents and purposes, has the lowest life expectancy in the United States of America. There are only two states that have a shorter life expectancy than us, Mississippi and West Virginia. And that's by a mere decimal point. So you're talking about a difference of weeks or maybe months. And so it's something that's desperately needed here. You're barely expected to live past your 60s in the state of Alabama, just a couple years north of 70 here in the state of Alabama. And that is problematic, and it's something that we certainly have the capacity to fix and address with some actions by our state legislature, and we really need them to do that. And now we need the federal government to go back in and pass the reimbursement incentive again, because that law has expired. So that's going to be the first thing that we're working on once we get to Congress in January.
Great. I can't, usually the first question I ask someone in your shoes, if you go back and look at my past interviews of elected officials, is I ask how they got involved in politics. I skip that with you because for those people who don't know, your father is a hero was a hero of mine and many, many, many others. He was a legendary lawyer in the state of Alabama who helped win a multi-million-dollar verdict against the Ku Klux Klan. Your mother is a state senator whose district includes Mobile. And so I'm curious the role your parents played in your decision to become a lawyer, but also even more so to dedicate yourself, frankly, to public service.
Yeah, so I mean, I grew up in that space, as you indicate. Like my father integrated University of Alabama's law school. He was in the first class to admit blacks at Alabama's law school in the late '60s, and then came out and went into doing a lot of civil rights work here back home and across the Black Belt region of the state of Alabama. And then he was elected to the state senate himself and served there until he passed away in '96. And my mom was on the city council at the time. And then she ran for the state senate seat and has been in that seat since then. And so I grew up in a space where, my parents would consistently sort of ask and expect of us to ask of ourselves, how do you take what God has given you in the form of, whatever form that is, in form of resources or experiences or networks or skills or, talents or education or, whatever it is, how do you take that and use it for the benefit and betterment of the people and places that are responsible for you being you in the first place? And for me, that's always been home. That's always been Mobile. That's always been Alabama. That's always been, the people of this state. And, so there's literally never been a day of my life where one or both of my parents were not involved in public service and community service, in elective office. And so that was, in part what motivated me and inspired me to want to take a public service route myself. That and also being from Alabama, and when you're from Alabama, you learn very early on that the role that government, particularly the federal government, has had to play in protecting the rights of people and making this state do right by people. I mean, this district that we're running in right now is, again, the product of federal law having to be utilized to make this state do right by voters. And beyond that, it's brought under a act that was an act of, the Voting Rights Act that was founded. I mean, that was, created, in large part because of things that happened in this state. And so, when you come from that environment, when you come from people that have given their lives, to trying to make the lives of other people in the community better, it's something that motivates you. And in my case, it inspired me to follow in my father's footsteps and go to law school. I too went to University of Alabama's law school. And then coming out of law school, I kind of went down a career path that is, it wasn't, necessarily preordained, but it was, there were certain things that I wanted to do, and each opportunity kind of led to another one. And every time that I've had a chance to step away from public service, I have not done so for the most part. And so, I think it's a privilege to be able to work on behalf of the people, of the communities, and the nation and the state that have given you so much. And that's what always pulled me to it, right? And that's something that A.G. Garland would speak so passionately about his motivation for wanting to serve and serving, essentially his entire adult life in public service was because he felt that this nation was one that was there for his family, and he needed to be there for it to make sure that it continued to provide the same type of opportunities that it had for him.
Yeah, and Eric Holder is my he calls me his partner in crime. So there's no crime, just so that everyone's clear. But when I mentioned that my law firm brought one of the cases in Alabama, we work very closely with the Attorney General, former Attorney General, and the wonderful organization he founded that focuses on these kinds of redistricting cases around the country. Speaking of which, I can't not ask you about voting rights, right? I mean, not just the Voting Rights Act, not just your district, but we have seen in the last, since frankly President Obama got elected, we have seen a systematic effort by states to restrict voting rights. It has gone in fits and starts, but and it has certainly accelerated since Donald Trump came onto the scene. But we have seen, Republican legislatures around the country, whether it's Georgia with SB 202 that they passed in 2001, or Texas with SB 1 that you may remember the Democrats walking out of the legislature to try to prevent its passage, but also in Congress, the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, a bill that the Voting Rights Act was a bill that Ronald Reagan reauthorized in 1982 and expanded. Called it the crown jewel of American democracy. It was reauthorized in 2006 under President Bush, and people always point out that it passed 98-0 in the Senate, only got 33 no votes in the House. But it was also, and this is I think an important point, it was championed by the business community. The chairman of the board of Walmart was one of the big proponents of reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act in 2006. Since then, we have seen this rollback of voting rights laws, the enactment of new voter suppression laws, and of course, the Supreme Court striking down key portions of the Voting Rights Act, though not the part that created your district. But I'm curious what your take is on the state of voting rights, but B, whether that is part of your legislative priorities as you look forward to joining the next Congress.
Well, look, I can say that, when you come from Alabama, if you're representing Alabama in any capacity, especially as an African American from Alabama, voting rights has to be at the forefront of your understanding of how you got, to be here, but B, it has to be at the forefront of what you're willing to go to bat for every single day in Washington, because it's those rights that gave you the opportunity to be there in the first place. I can say, the sense that we have seen, the efforts that we have seen across the country are very troubling, particularly when they are combined with not so covert efforts to undermine faith in democracy. And that's kind of, or undermine faith in the integrity of elections. And that's the sort of justification that they use to try to do this. Like we're making it safer by making it tougher for people to vote. It hits a little different when you when you come from people who literally could not vote because of the color of their skin, when you come from people who are still alive that can show you receipts of being from poll tax receipts from being charged to go vote, from people who fought for, who still were the first to be elected in whatever position, the first to have certain roles in government. And so it's something that is important to me. I will be co-sponsoring the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act, along with Terry Sewell, who, as I'm sure you know, is the sort of voting rights steward of the House of Representatives now that Congressman John Lewis is no longer there. And so it's something that we have to prioritize and have to keep at the forefront of. Like, voting should be easy. I'm a huge proponent of a lot of things. I'm a huge proponent of automatic voter registration. I'm a huge proponent that election day should not be on a Tuesday, that it should be on a Saturday. I'm a huge proponent of an early voting. These are things that are common sense, that we have the resources and the technological and commonsensical capacities to enforce in a manner as they have been enforced for hundreds of years, in the state of Alabama, in terms of protecting the integrity of our elections. And I think it is a sad day when we have people that the integrity of an election is a retroactive analysis that hinges on a question of, did we win or not?
Right.
And that's a dangerous place to be in. It's a very dangerous place to be in. And so I am 100% committed to making sure that we can stand up for voting rights across this country for everybody. I'm 100% committed to making sure that we can push common sense changes to make voting easier and not make it harder. And there are things that we can do. I mean, when you turned 18, just like when I turned 18, just like when every other male citizen turned 18, we got a notice in the mail telling us to sign up for selective service, and we did so out of our patriotic obligation that we have to this country. But they didn't tell you to send in a picture of your ID. They didn't tell you to send in a matching signature. They didn't tell you, so it's, I believe that registering to vote, at least initially, should be just as easy. And so we have to fight back against these attacks and make sure that we're doing everything that we can to make democracy as inclusive and as accessible as it possibly can be. And I will be on the front lines doing just that.
All right. So with the little time I have left, I got to ask you, you have a sense of optimism about you, which is wonderful. I am sure you meet lots of people who are very worried right now. They're worried about their futures. They're worried about putting food on the table, but they're also worried about the state of voting and the state of democracy and the uncertainty of an incoming Trump administration and they're just very worried. What do you tell people who want to know what they should be hopeful about? Like, what gives you hope that people watching this should hear?
Yeah. So for me, it's looking at where I come from. I come from a state that was, one of the darker places in terms of where we've been in this country, in terms of political divide, divisiveness, and the dark chapters of our history, whether that be from slavery or Jim Crow or racially motivated violence, voting rights struggle. We have been in much darker places as a nation. We have been. And so I look to that, and I look to the fact that we came out of that, we emerged out of that. And every time that we went through dark times in our history, we emerged out in a much better place than we went in. And we emerged out with progress that we were able to ride the wave of for decades, if not centuries ahead. And so although times are tough, although we are seeing a sort of rise in certain sentiments that are reminiscent of things that we've seen historically, decades ago, even centuries ago, I remain optimistic because I believe that America knows how to prevail over bad. I believe that America has always has and always will be on that path towards progress, the path towards a brighter future, and the path towards setting an example for the rest of the world. And so that's what I look to. But I also just look to people who every day, like particularly in the context of the economy, things have been hard. But here in this district, I told you, seven of the poorest counties in America are located in this district. These counties are comprised of people who've been finding a way to find a way for much longer than just the last 3 years or 4 years. Life has been tough since they've known life in many of these counties, in many of these places. Yet that strength, that resolve, that perseverance that they have, just sort of ingrained in their DNA has always led them to be able to push through. And it's those same people with that same sort of background and courage and focus and just, head down, just get the work done. Let's just figure out a way to get through it and to make a way. Those are the same type of people that give me that sort of inspiration to do the same thing at the congressional level now, to be able to keep pushing forward and remind people that, look, times can get hard, but we can push through it. We can work through it. We can do it together, and we must do it together. And so I remain optimistic, and I think that, our past is indicative of what can come in our future. And I think that we can do it. And I think Alabama can be a significant part of leading the way to do that.
Well, I have to tell you, you are an inspiration to so many of us, and we are all watching you as you enter the Congress and expecting great things. We're also watching your congressional district, and believe me, there is no one more closely following the litigation around your congressional district than Democracy Docket. We cover it literally more closely than anyone. Every nit and jot, every pleading, everything gets covered. And when the trial happens and we are victorious, and the map is finally adopted, and you are well on your way to re-election, I expect to have you back on and to celebrate that as well. But in the meantime, thank you, Representative-elect Figures, for joining me.
Thank you, Mark. Really appreciate it, man. Look forward to coming back.
Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Defending Democracy. Make sure you're subscribed to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. We'll see you next time. Defending Democracy is a production of Democracy Docket, LLC.